I'd like to call the regular meeting of the January 17th Board of Canvassers to order, and I will ask the registrar to please take the roll.
Jim Donahue,
Present.
Kelsey Maranta, Kirk McDonough.
Our first item on tonight's agenda is to approve the agenda that we have before us. Is there a motion? Is there a second? Any discussion? Clerk?
Ms. Maranta, Mr. Donahue,
Yes.
and just so for the boards, so the board's aware, the record for tonight's meeting is being recorded. So just make sure anytime you speak, just hit your, there's a mic, just move it a little closer, and you have to hold the button down while you're talking. Otherwise, it won't pick up on the recording.
Thank you, Director. And also for members of the public who are here with us this evening, there are copies of tonight's agenda and supporting materials right here in the front if you need to see those. Our next item this evening is to approve the minutes of our prior meeting from December 5th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve? Motion made by
Second.
and seconded. Any discussion on the minutes or revisions?
Ms. Maranta,
Yes.
Mr. Donahue.
Yes. Item number 4 on our agenda tonight is public acknowledgement. I have no public acknowledgements this evening except to acknowledge the members of the public who are here with us tonight. We thank you for your participation. Director, anything?
Just for the record in the minutes, so we do have present here with us, retired Associate Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court, Robert Flanders, representing the No Labels Rhode Island Party, as well as Gary Sass, who is the chairperson of the No Labels Rhode Island Party, our legal counsel, David Leozzi, and our staff members, Teresa Bucci, Maria Madonna, and also Thomas Lima, who is running the video operating. So we'll just reflect that in the minutes.
For the record, thank you, Director. We'll now open the floor to any public comment. And we'll entertain public comment as we move through the agenda. So under new business this evening, we have a few items. The first is that the board may discuss and/or take responsive action regarding a communication received on January 11th, 2024 from the No Labels Rhode Island organization. I believe that this letter is in the packet of information that the director prepared. So Director, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So it's just a letter from Matthew Sanderson from Kaplan and Drysdale, who identified himself as reaching out on behalf of the No Labels Rhode Island. He had just read the media reports regarding tonight and provide some comments to the board. So I've just actually asked the board just to accept it into the record.
Is there a motion to accept the communication into the record?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask the clerk to take the roll.
Ms. Maranta? Mr. Donahue?
Yes. Agenda item B, under section 6 in new business, the board may discuss and/or take responsive action regarding various discrepancies found on validated petition papers received from the No Labels Rhode Island organization. Again, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So last week, we received a directive from the Rhode Island Board of Elections providing instructions for the petition process for the No Labels Party. I believe it's between 17 and 18,000 signatures statewide that the organization has to get to become a recognized political party for ballot access in Rhode Island. Our office received about 3,700 signatures in December, and we weren't allowed to start validating them yet until last week, until we get direction from the BOE. And once our staff did start to validate them on some particular petitions, we noticed some issues and discrepancies that are not commonly seen on petition papers. The most glaring of those would be some voters who are deceased and have been deceased for several years, which would predate when this petition began circulation last fall. There are some individual petitions that have an unusually high number of signature mismatches. or a usually high number of voters who are otherwise rejected or for not being eligible or having moved out of state. This is, just to clarify, out of hundreds of individual forms, there are 13 that at least rise to a level of suspicion. That's not to say that the signature collector themselves, who signed the affidavit, actually did anything wrong in all 13 of those cases. There is certainly suspicion there. It could also be that the persons that signed the form signed for someone else. There's a lot of different explanations. It's not really within our ability to investigate that thoroughly. That's something that law enforcement has the capability of doing, and that is something that procedurally the State Board of Elections did last summer, as you recall, when there were issues with particular signature papers for the Sabina Matos campaign. So in following a similar procedure, when our office staff did notice that there were some issues with these individual petitions, we forwarded it to the State Board of Elections. The Board of Elections, again following procedure, sent out a statewide alert so other local boards that are validating petitions could be aware. Concurrently with that, there were also a number of issues found with one of the presidential campaigns for presidential candidate Ramaswamy. Our office did receive a number of forms for that campaign. However, none rose to the level of being suspicious to the point that the signatures on the forms were drastically different than other forms. Chairman, I do have the suspicious, or the ones that we have found or identified to be suspicious, which is a judgment call here. Again, some are actually rise to a higher level than others, in particular those which I shared with Judge Flanders, who came in from the No Labels Party this week to ask for copies of these. I mean, they're all public documents. I think the first motion that the board should make would just be to adopt these specific 13 along with their accompanying documentation as part of the record for this meeting. That way, if this is forwarded to the State Board of Elections, they'll know what we have here. Each petition I've labeled 1 through 13, starting with the petition number, which is 10907. That's the number assigned to all of these petitions statewide for that particular, the way it's coded in the system. And then with the supporting documentation, I've labeled them with a letter A through G or H, depending on how many supporting documentation pieces there are. For example, on the very first petition here, of the first 3 voters, 2 are deceased, and the second one is not a registered voter. So there's a supporting documentation which includes an obituary that matches the name and date of birth of the voter, a record from the Central Voter Registration System that shows the voter is deceased, a copy of a death certificate with Social Security number has been redacted, a printout or screenshot from the Central Voter Registration System that show the voter signatures and how they don't match, et cetera. So that's just to describe what's in this packet. So I think the first order of business, Chairman, will be to make that motion to receive these on the record.
So as a procedural matter, to put these signatures on the record, I'll entertain a motion to accept them into the record for tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Director, any discussion on that? Okay, Director, would you like to take the roll, please?
Ms. Parenta,
Yes.
Mr. Donahue.
Yes.
And then I know that we do have representatives from the No Labels Rhode Island Party here, Chairman. I've kind of set the scene of just the very basics before I hand these out for the board to actually take a look at. I'm sure that they may want to be heard as well.
Of course.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, Mr. Lima, Mr. Igliozzi, and staff who were very kind to me and very helpful when I did come in to look at these documents that were provided. I'm here tonight as counsel for the No Labels organization. I just want the board to know that No Labels has retained a national signature gathering firm, as many of these organizations do when they need to submit a great number of signatures to qualify on the ballot or as a candidate. And No Labels has gathered over 32,000 signatures and have submitted them. And they used 30 petition circulators, so-called. The group that they used is a national firm, signature gathering firm called AMT, that employs these signature gatherers and circulators. And they are put through the various training sessions, and they are full-time employees of this AMT organization. And AMT's petition circulators must attend training sessions and to ensure that they know the state laws and what's allowed and what isn't allowed. And they must review and sign multiple documents in which they certify that they understand and will abide by the applicable rules and laws. NLT intends to take immediate and appropriate action if and when it comes to their attention that any of these petition gatherers or circulators have done anything inappropriate. And in the case of the allegedly deceased members of the public or that appeared and verified, the two of these gatherers have been immediately either terminated or left the organization. One left in November, so neither of them, of the two that I'm aware of right now who were involved, are still doing this. And one of them was fired immediately after we communicated that there was apparent fraud in certifying a signature of a deceased voter. So I want the board to know that No Labels takes this very seriously, and if we learn from, I know the board is in the process of continuing to review petitions. That work is not yet over. And so I'm hoping that the communications as to any other irregularities, such as particularly in the case of any deceased voters being certified as having signed a document, which they in fact could not and did not, will be communicated to me so that I can let No Labels know and appropriate action can be taken. We intend to cooperate with any law enforcement action, and we don't know if that's going to be one of the consequences of this. But if it is, then we're prepared to cooperate fully and do whatever we can to make sure that none of that continues, and that appropriate disciplinary action and other actions are taken with respect to any responsible persons that are having anything to do with our organization. So I wanted the board to know that we take this seriously. I commend Mr. Lima and the folks that work with me at the office of the board to help me identify these irregularities that they've noticed, and I'm hopeful that will continue in the future as they continue to complete their review of these petitions. So again, I wanted to thank Mr. Lima and the folks here who have been very helpful to me, and I'm hoping that once they get through all of this, we can identify any further problems and take appropriate action with respect to any fraud for sure and any other irregularities that may be identified. So thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Judge Flanders, for your clear statement on this. Can we entertain questions or not really, no? Questions of the judge if people have them? Sure. Justice, thank you. Sorry, Your Honor.
I'm not offended by judge or any other thing.
Just-
Even Bob is great.
There you go. Thank you, Solicitor. Two members of the board, any questions for the justice?
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Chairman, I do have the questionable petitions that are here. This is the ones that we've identified, and that I would suggest that are transmitted to the Board of Elections for further investigation. I'm just going to pass these out for the board. I will say that if we have Terry Bucci as well as Mary Madonna here, each of whom validated about half of those petitions. So if there's any questions for the three of us, just let us know. But if we were to answer questions, we should probably be sworn in, because we'll be testifying to evidence at that point.
So if I started with Commissioner McDonough and move them back this way, does that work for you?
I have a question. The one with the S, the one that are suspicious, right?
Can you repeat it? So S would be a signature mismatch. N or NE is not eligible, which means someone who's canceled or otherwise not eligible to vote. And N would be not registered, a voter not found.
Okay. Thank you.
missing something from there? Is that it? So, Director, the motion now would be to, and the solicitor has reviewed all of these as well. The motion now, as I understand it, if the board chooses to, would be to move that these signatures be referred to the Board of Elections for further investigation.
For further investigation or possible referral to law enforcement.
So the motion would, so is there a commissioner who would like to move that motion? That these signatures be referred to the Board of Elections for investigation and possible referral to law enforcement?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner McDonough.
Maybe this is getting too in the weeds, but these people who have, if it's found that they didn't sign, the suspicious ones, which I have the utmost faith in our office to decide that. The three people who are here are experts in this by any determination. You've seen signatures for years. You've gone through these. What do we owe these people whose signatures have been fraudulently used? Like, is it should we contact them? What's the process? Like, because I feel like if it was me, I'd want to know. Like, is there some type of process, or am I just getting too into it that I shouldn't?
So on our end, there's nothing in process, and there wouldn't be any requirement because we're not the responsible party. But on a legal end, if this were to get to that point, is there any kind of, I mean, those people would be entitled to any action on their own?
Yeah, I don't, the city. Pull it down. And don't forget, this is nomination papers, this is not disenfranchising anyone's vote.
And
Not disenfranchising a voter.
And I know, if my signature was forged in nomination papers, I'd be pretty upset myself. And yeah, there are several other towns that are investigating issues with the presidential candidates' signatures. And yeah, there are some well-known individuals on those. I think actually we have a well-known individual who was forged in this case.
Yeah, Mrs. Carty. I was shocked when I saw Mrs. Carty's.
To Commissioner McDonough's question, though, it is possible that as part of any subsequent investigation after this, if this motion is approved, that people could be contacted as part of that investigation.
If a living voter's name was forged, and we know it was forged, it gets tough at that point. If law enforcement determines that, it could just be that their signature on an individual signature changed, and that's why it was rejected for one signature. But when you have 4 or 5 signatures in a row, then you have to make the determination of which one of those was forged versus somebody just was sloppy that day.
Any other questions or comments under discussion before we move the question? Director, again, at the top of the meeting, I think you indicated that in the past, the procedure has been to refer these to the Board of Elections when they come up for investigation. Is that true?
Correct. So if it was a local candidate, city council, school committee, maybe even general assembly, but especially a local city office, it would probably be done internally because those local papers are certified locally and the originals are held locally. Whereas with state papers, for a candidate, they're transmitted to Secretary of State. In this case, the permanent record holder is going to be the Board of Elections, and they are typically the appellant for, usually if a candidate is short of signatures, that appeal does not go to this board, it goes direct to the State Board of Elections. And this is a little different, being it's a party ballot access process, it's a petition process, but it's still a statewide process, so similar to a statewide candidate. For example, if the No Labels Party was short 10 signatures as of the August 1st deadline, it's still a long way to go to that, they could appeal that matter to the State Board of Elections. It wouldn't go to the individual local boards, at least to my understanding.
Okay. So again, given that, I think, the public should be able to expect and predict how a board would react when there are irregularities under different circumstances. So under that, I plan to support the motion when the vote is called. Any other discussion?
Just a quick, so those will not be signed by this board. They'll just go directly to the State Board of Elections.
So the board should still sign because there are still valid signatures that our staff has identified. And even there's actually one form in this packet that only had a couple of signatures that were invalidated. So it has 0 valid signatures. So the board would simply be certifying that our office has found there are 0 valid signatures. So and that's concurrent with case law in the past where the state board has found that an invalid signature on a form does not necessarily invalidate the entire form.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good question. Anything else? Director, could you just read the motion again for the public watching and in the chamber, as well as for the board, just one more time?
Sure, Chairman. So on a motion by Mr. McDonough and seconded by Ms. Maranta, the motion is to refer the 13 suspicious nomination papers that have been discovered to date to the State Board of Elections for investigation and possible referral by the State Board to law enforcement.
Great. Please take the roll.
Ms. Maranta.
Yes.
Mr. Donahue.
Yes. Motion passes. Thank you again. Thank you, Commissioners.
And one other matter, before we move on, Chairman, so to date,
Just a handful.
Terry, Maria, and Emerson have validated these, in addition to the 13 that are here. We do have roughly 20% of the total that, the 3,700 signatures that were originally delivered to our office left to validate. It's likely, I think we'll be done with that by Tuesday of next week, if not earlier. We do have a board meeting next week. I'm posting the agenda for that board meeting tomorrow. So if it's the pleasure of the board, I'll put the validation of the remaining signatures that we have received so far. More could be delivered for in the next several months on that agenda. That said, if while going through the remaining forms, if there are additional discrepancies, I think the board has a couple of options. They could authorize us at a staff level to append this and include that with the transmission to the Board of Elections at a later date, or because we're meeting anyway next week, I could just put an agenda item in case any are discovered. Now, as of right now, going through a lot here, and no additional ones have been discovered, so it's really up to the board whether or not we want to put a preemptive agenda item for next week, or just authorize us to do it at a staff level. But in either case, I do have to post the agenda tomorrow, so that would need to be noticed.
So let's entertain a brief discussion, if that's okay, about that before we make a vote. Is there opinion on the director's options regarding the remaining signatures to be validated? Commissioner McDonough?
I'd like to hear from our attorney, which is the best way to proceed.
Mr. Lima's been, I would say, how quickly can we get it done? I guess that's the question.
So I don't think that's a question. We could have the remaining, of the currently received signatures, more could be dropped off, but of the currently receiving signatures, I don't think there's a question that they will be all validated by the next time the board meets, which I believe is Tuesday night. It's an either-or question of, should I put an item on the agenda for the board to review or adjudicate any additional suspicious forms that may be found as part of that process, which would need to be posted tomorrow morning because of the 48 hours notice, or does the board now just want to authorize us at the staff level to, if we see additional forms that rise to the same level of suspicion that these 13 have, just append the original transmission to the Board of Elections without bringing it before the board again?
The meeting is next Tuesday. I suggest that we put it on before the board here next Tuesday.
So I'll include that as an agenda item. And then again, we have not, at this point, we have not identified any additional forms, just in case we do of the 150 maybe or so that are left to go through.
I think that's the right decision. So you don't need to vote on that, right? You can just- Great. Okay, thank you, Solicitor, for that. Thank you, Commissioner. Agenda item C, the board may discuss and approve combined polling places for the April 2nd, 2024 presidential preference primary and the tentative June 4th, 2024 special referendum election for submission to the Rhode Island Board of Elections for final approval in accordance with Rhode Island General Laws 1711-1, 1711-1.1, and 17-15-5. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Have a nice evening. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Director.
So this matter is a little easier, Chairman. This is our routine combination of polling places for a special election and presidential primary. Now, it has not been routine the last few years because we actually haven't had an election where we've combined polls normally since the PPP in 2016. That's because during COVID in 2020, it was a predominantly mail ballot election. We only had 2 polls in the city, and the combination rules were suspended by executive order of the governor. Similarly, in March of 2021, we only had 3 polls citywide for a March special election citywide, and that's because that election was called by the General Assembly, which also suspended the normal combination rules. And then in every other election we've had, aside from the Ward 6 special, we've opened up every poll. That would be September and November of 2018, September and November of 2020, September and November of 2022, and we intend to do so again September and November of this year. That said, the PPP is normally a low turnout election. Turnout can be anywhere from 10 to 15%, at the high end in the 30s. And certainly the Ward 6, June 4th, Cranston School Bond Special Referendum will likely be very low turnout based on the past. In 1994 and in 2003, we had school bond citywide elections with turnout that was in the single digits, less than 5%. In both of those elections, only 6 polls are opened, 1 per ward. The combination statute requires 1 poll per ward. We would need a special legislation for the General Assembly if we wanted fewer than 1 poll. So 1 poll per ward, I think, makes sense for the school bond election in June. And again, we are not anticipating a lot of controversy around that. There seems to be a lot of support for that in the city, in turnout in other towns that have had school bond elections in recent months, particularly in November of 2023, was similarly fairly low. And those towns likewise would, open up a handful of polls. For the PPP, in 2012 and 2016, the city opened in 6 polls, 1 per ward. In 2016, there were some lines. That was before we were using poll pads to check voters in. So that was there was a bottleneck, basically. Now, in 2020, our original plan in January of 2020, right around this time, before COVID hit, was to open 12 polls. So this is pretty much the same plan that we were going to have in 2020 before that election was changed dramatically. So I have forwarded these plans for review from the State Board of Elections over the last several weeks. I have not received any negative feedback from them or about it. I'm pretty confident that 12 polls would be adequate to serve the voters here for the PPP, and that 6 would be more than adequate for the special election, particularly since a higher percentage of voters will continue to be voting by mail and early voting, which takes the pressure off of the polls on Election Day. There will be 20 days of early voting at the Story Center for both of these elections. I had another point, but I think I've sold it.
Director, as a point of procedure, do you want to approve these in 2 separate motions, or do you want one motion that approves them both at the same time?
I think two separate motions would be appropriate.
Perfect. So we'll start with the presidential preference primary election. Is there a motion to approve the combined polling places for the April 2nd, 2024 presidential preference primary election as presented by the director in the attached document?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Under discussion. Any discussion on these or questions for the director?
So just for the records, for the board, it's a 2 polls per ward. The larger poll in each ward will handle the bulk of the voters in the precinct. The smaller poll that has less square footage or less parking or isn't as centrally located handles the fewer number of voters in each case.
Director, on April 2nd, and I assume on June 4th as well, the school locations, is school in session when voting is happening?
So we could thank our city clerk, Tracy Nelson, who at the beginning of last year was the clerk of the Newport Board of Canvassers. She lobbied her senator and the Secretary of State's office, Sharon Oyer, and the secretary to introduce legislation that for the first time allows us to use schools for the PPP. That bill passed with support of election officials around the state. So yes, we have great options for the PPP that we did not actually have previously. We had to use non-school locations. The one concern I do have for June 4th is we are using Cranston East. School would be in session that day. Now, East is an exception because as a high school, they have a much larger gym. It's segregated from the rest of the building, so there aren't as many security concerns as it would be in an elementary school. It's also not an educational space like a cafeteria or a swing space that we do use as a voting room in some schools, which would preclude their use while school's in session. Parking would be an issue between 7 a.m. and 2 p.m. I would probably have extra police details and maybe even extra poll worker, exterior line control poll worker to help mitigate that, especially around bus pickup and drop-off time. I've been in communications with the superintendent. It's possible that Just East may be able to do distance learning that day. I think it's also around finals time too, which will help that somewhat. They may need bride approval for that. I'm not really sure. I have not heard back from the superintendent either way. I did let her know that regardless of whether or not she can help us there, or the school department can help us there, we do need the building because there really isn't anything else. The only alternative for that election, say for some reason we could not use East, would be to use the Pastora Youth Center, which is over the line in Ward 3, but it's right over the line, and then operate the senior center for Ward 3 voters, which is less ideal because there's less parking there. But as of right now, this is the best plan because East has the capability to handle the entire ward rather than trying to cram everybody into smaller polls. And every other poll in Ward 2 is a school, so we don't really have any other options. The Portuguese Club is a Ward 2 poll. It's located physically in Ward 1 on the other side of 95. I think it'd be hard for Ward 2 voters to get there.
I would agree. Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Commissioner McDonough?
Quick thing, what about this room?
So we have looked at City Hall as a polling location. So the state has a formula that they use for square footage per voter. So when you have an award, 8,000 or 9,000 potential voters, and then you say a 40% max turnout, that's still the square footage in this room, even if we took all the desks and moved them to the hallway outside, still wouldn't be high enough. Also, because there's an elevator, now if that elevator will be constant use all day, that'd be a problem for line queuing, and if the elevator would go down, we immediately would fall out of ADA compliance. Also, at City Hall, school would be in session as well, so the parking would still be the issue here. Now, we used to, and we probably still will, need to use downstairs as a polling place for the presidential same-day registration precinct in November. The downstairs is configured a little bit in the hallway in front of our office. We normally would have 10 to 12 poll workers out there at 5 or 6 tables, and it'd be very hard to set that up the way it's configured now. So that is a challenge we're going to have to figure out for November. But to have a full ward polling place downstairs, again, you run into the same problems. It's just the square footage isn't there to properly support it. In an emergency, we could probably make it work, but it's just not ideal.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the polling locations for the April 2nd, 2024 presidential preference primary, 2 locations per ward. Clerk, please take the roll.
Ms. Maranta.
Yes.
Mr. Donahue.
Yes. Motion passes. We will now take a vote on the June 4th. Is there a motion to approve the polling locations as recommended by the director, 1 polling location per ward for the June 4th, 2024 special referendum election?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonough.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any discussion on the June 4th special referendum? Hearing none, I'll ask the director to take the roll.
Ms. Maranta.
Yes.
Mr. Donahue.
Yes. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Commissioners.
And Chairman, on the next item, actually, if we could take the agenda just a little bit out of order, that way Solicitor Igliozzi could take off for the evening, but we can get right into, we can save that item for last because that's just signing the papers.
Any objection from the board for switching the order of the remaining items? Thank you, Director. Updates from the registrar. Director.
So last week, I had the privilege to attend the local leadership conference for the Federal Election Assistance Commission. The expenses are paid for by the federal government. We had 2 representatives from every state are part of the conference. Not everyone could attend, but we had a very good turnout. There was a lot of talking about 2024 problems with other election officials, how they're handling them in their particular states. Some things that weren't even really on my radar, and I put some things I think on other people's radars. I did speak at a panel for the LLC as well about some of those issues that we have, and I'm trying to get some more support and help from the federal government for local election offices, including legislation in Congress. From there, I traveled to the Texas Association of Election Administrators Conference. They actually have a 5-day conference for their association every year. All the counties in Texas go. And myself, Rob Rock, and Kathy Placencia from the Secretary of State's office were there to speak on a panel regarding the No Time to Fail elections documentary. Again, we had a good opportunity to network and talk with a lot of our colleagues in Texas. They do things very differently there, as you can imagine, but there are also a lot of similarities too. And again, we brought back some interesting information there. And while there, we also talked to some officials from Homeland Security, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, who presented at the conference. I got back in town on Thursday, so I just want to report that out to the board. And then the other item in regards to the commercial property voters. So we, as you know, next week we do have a hearing on commercial property voters that they've all received their, or they've all were sent certified return receipt letters. Many of those have come back as undeliverable. You'll have that presented to you next week. One of the voters did contact us after we reached out and updated their address, so we're down to 6 on that sheet. So there will only be 6 challenges presented to you, or basically as a person that filed the challenge, I've administratively withdrawn it. So of those 6, as of today, none have responded, none have changed their address. I've also tried to call any phone numbers that they may have on file. I've also tried to email if they've had an email address on file, and just have not received a response from those 6. So those 6 are continuing. I do not anticipate that they'll appear at the hearing. They certainly can. But as of right now, if they do not appear, the best the board can do next week would be to make those voters inactive.
Anything else?
I don't know if I had anything else on the agenda. I seem to have lost my...
Item C was no labels, Rhode Island Party Petition Process Directive from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Chairman. So yeah, that's the last item, and it's in your packet. It's, I think, self-explanatory. There's communication from the Board of Elections, from the Deputy Director, Miguel Nunez, who has an email just providing some instructions for how to validate these, as well as a directive that was adopted by the full board. If there's any questions on that, just let me know, but I think the board's familiar with the process at this point.
Questions for the Director? Okay. That closes out item 7. We'll now return to agenda item 6D. Board may review and complete certifications for nomination and petition papers that have been validated in accordance with Rhode Island General Laws 17-1-29, 17-1217, and 17-14-11.
So in the past, what we've typically done, particularly when there's a high volume of these, is one board member or 2 board members will fill out the top part of the affidavits. That will kind of speed things up a little bit. Then we only need 2 signatures. Now, in this case, Kelsey and Kurt cannot sign the same paper. So Jim, you'll have to unfortunately sign every single one of them. But if you wanted to split up the work, I mean, Kelsey could also sign every form, or the 2 of you could split it up 50-50 to get them signed faster. One thing that the board will have to do is transmit the number, or the certified or validated number that's on the front of the form from our staff onto the back of the form when you do sign off on these. We do have a stamp that says Cranston, that way you don't have to write in Cranston every time if you'd like to use that to save a few seconds. But and it's the pleasure of the board, really, on the no labels petition. I don't know how late you want to be here tonight. The pressing ones are the presidential primary signatures. We are up against a deadline in the coming days for that, and if we get them all signed tonight, I can get them up to the Secretary of State's office tomorrow. But for the no labels, there are many more of those. We're meeting next week. That will also be on the agenda, so if the board would want to start those tonight, and then when your hand gets tired, we can finish them next week. There is no rush for those, because again, we have until August 1st.
Why don't we commit to getting the presidential primary signatures done tonight. Thank you, Solicitor. So, how do you want us to split them up?
So Terry would be very upset if we get these out of the way.
I have heard that directive before, so we want to maintain order.
So we go by candidate. We have the Biden signatures. We want to start with them.
Okay.
And I do have blue pens for everybody. So
You want blue pens?
just so it's easier to, it's not required, but it's easier to figure out the photocopies. We copy all these before we send them to the Secretary of State.
Oops.
So you
Blue
want to
pens.
pass down a couple more candidates.
Yeah.
Just trade off as you finish one packet.
Yes, we finished one packet. Great. Yes, so I get to sign everything.
Yeah, so I mean, you can all fill out the backs.
So the number is that number there.
Yes, so there's a form number. Don't put the form number. It's the total number of validated.
Total number of validated signatures.
A means accepted.
Accepted.
Yeah, there's a code at the bottom of every page that explains it. Pass that one down to Kirk.
Kirk, these are for you. You're very welcome.
Now we'll give him another.
Kirk, you got another pile?
And they do get stuck together sometimes, so just try to make sure that you don't miss any in the packet. If it only has one signature, we can't. Every single form, yep. Even if it has 0 signatures, it needs to be signed. Oh, yes, yeah, I only have one stamp that says Cranston, but.
Nope, I'm good.
Fight over it.
I'm good. Kirk can use the stamp. Sorry, Nick, this is going to be tricks with the clip. I'll let you do that. Okay. All right. Director, first of all, to you and your staff, I mean, just having gone through the exercise and discussion tonight, I mean, your staff does a great job with this, and you do too. I mean, it's very, very well prepared for tonight's meeting. I know it's a lot of work for the department, but you have some very professional people led by yourself, and that's been very helpful. So thank you for the support of the board in this process so far.
Thank you, Chairman.
Here, with no other items on the agenda to be covered, unless there's new business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Director, please take the final roll. You want me to do it? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Director. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you Tuesday night. Thank you, Tom.